North America, and we are going to focus on the Virginia colony and the Massachusetts Bay colony, and it's going to be England in America, which will, of course, become the United States of America. These English colonies is what will become the USA. So, I just clicked on the slideshow that is labeled Virginia and NBC, and it's actually last week's. So if you want to follow along, it's in last week's, and I'm starting on slide 3, I believe. I'm skipping over this part.
You skipping over? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So reasons for European migration to the Americas. When we talk about migration, whether it is Americans moving across the U.S., like with the gold rush, or to settle lands out the west with Oregon Trail. We always talk about pull and push. What pulls people to a new world and what pushes them out of their homeland. And that is what brought a lot of English to America. The pull to America was a lot of times just hope to be able to make a better living. It's economic. People wanted, they thought they could have a better life, a better financial situation in the Americas. Sometimes it was because they already had family over there, but usually economics is number one pull. Push, what pushes you out of your home country? Be a lot of different things. War is usually a biggie. Famine. Religious persecution is listed number one up there. But usually there's something that's not good. And you want to try to get a better life. Whenever Trump was running for president for the first time back in 2016, one of the very first speeches he gave, he talked about building the wall along the southern border of Mexico. And he got a lot of grief. People were mad at him. Some people were mad at him for saying that Mexico, they don't send us their best people. Well, if you were well educated and wealthy and live in the high life in Mexico, why would you want to come to the U.S. to begin with, right? Migration is about, there's something that's pushing you out of your home country, and there's something that's drawing you to that new place. So even though President Trump went on to say some ugly things about they're sending rapists and murderers, but his initial comment is, Mexico's not sending us their best people. Well, that's true. Because when you're talking about migration, a lot of times it's folks that are very desperate and are having to leave under circumstances that make them not the best people. And we're going to see some of that in this early colonial period as well. All right, so have we heard of this phrase before? The sun never sets on the British Empire. The British were very proud of this. The British were quite excited that they had colonies around the world and that everything the sun was always shining someplace on England, because they had obviously little island of England, but they also had Australia at one point, right? They had India at one point. So you had little bitty England, the island, and then they make colonies in Africa, they make a colony out of India, they make some settlements in China, particularly Hong Kong, Australia, and also islands in the Pacific. So the sun was always shining on the British at one point. However, that wasn't necessarily the case early on. We're going to start with the Virginia colony. Virginia. 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 Virginia was named after Queen Elizabeth I. How did they get Virginia out of Queen Elizabeth I? She was the Virgin Queen. She was the Virgin Queen. She was never married, so therefore she never had sex. Therefore she must be a virgin. You can't have sex until you're married. So she was known as the Virgin Queen because she was never married. And whenever the colony was founded, they named it after her, the Virgin Queen. Sir Walter Raleigh is going to be put in charge of creating this first settlement in the New World of America. The French are already up around in Canada. The Spanish are already down in Florida. The English are going to land right in the middle of all of that. So right in the middle of all of that is about Virginia. So Sir Walter Raleigh, he is going to gather up some supplies and some willing participants, and they are going to try to establish a colony off the coast of what's now North Carolina, actually. It's a little island called Roanoke. This is 1585. Sir Walter Raleigh packs up 120 people, men, women, and children, takes them to Roanoke, dumps them off with supplies, and says, all right, guys, start building shelters, start looking for gold, start planting crops, start finding some good hunting grounds. I'll be back in about 8 months with resupplies and more people. And he didn't come back. He didn't come back for 3 years. And he didn't come back for 3 years because this was the time whenever Spain decided they were going to invade England with their Spanish Armada. And the English Navy and all the English ships were occupied trying to fight off this invasion. So we talked about the defeat of the Spanish Armada last time, and there you have it. There. I'm clicking, but I'm not, there it is. So whenever he does come back in 3 years, he doesn't find anybody. He doesn't find really anything. There are no houses. There is no gardens. There is and he goes to several of the small islands along that North Carolina coast. He was like, no, seriously, this is it. This is where I left everybody. And what they found is this. The word Croatoan carved into a tree. Now, those are English letters, right? So he knew that his English people wrote them, but he could not make out what it meant. Was that the name of a rival tribe? Like an Indian tribe that had came and killed them all? Or maybe the people were having a hard time surviving, so they went to go live with the Croatans? But it was gone. It became known as the Lost Colony. No idea what happened. Maybe a hurricane came in and swept them all out to sea. Maybe the aliens came and abducted them all.
They found their DNA with the Croatians.
Yeah. So we have some evidence now that they probably just went to go live with the Indians. But before all that, yeah, it wasn't the Lost Colony. What happened to them? This is great American mystery. Queen Elizabeth will die shortly later, a little bit later, 1603, and her cousin is going to become the next monarch of England, James I. His claim to fame is translating the Bible into an English translation, as in the King James Version of the Bible, which a lot of churches still use today. This is the James of the King James Version of the Bible. James, he right, we're going back to America. We're going back to America. We're gonna try this again, try to put some English people over in America. The Spanish are bringing back tons of gold and silver. The French are making big money off the fur trade, bringing exotic furs back to Europe and selling them for big profits. The King of England wants in on this. So he is going to allow a company to be formed, and he's actually a member of this company. He owns a little bit of it, and it was the Virginia Company. 1606. It's a joint stock company founded to create profitable settlements in the U.S., in North America. Joint stock, meaning that any individual, or even a business, can buy shares of stock of the Virginia Company and own a little bit of the Virginia Company. So, whenever those settlers start finding gold, and they bring it back, and they turn it over to the Virginia Company, and the Virginia Company makes all this money off the gold, then you get a little bit of piece of that profit. That was the plan. The Virginia Company. So to buy into, to be a member of the Virginia Company, to buy stock, you give $500, $1,000, and then that money goes to buy supplies, hire boats, hire a crew, hire people to go to America. And then hopefully they will find gold or find something that can be profitable, and you'll get your money back plus a profit. That's the plan. Now, eventually we're going to be talking about three types of, this one, the Y is supposed to be up there. Okay, sorry, font's all jacked up on that. So there's three types of colonies. We'll get to the others in a bit. A crown colony, the king owns proprietary, a single person kind of owns it. And we'll talk about each of those in a bit. We're going to come back to them. We're focusing on Jamestown right now. So the Virginia Company, they are going to hire they're going to hire 100 men to go to America, go to that Virginia colony, and do something to make a profit. They were told to find gold. Some of the equipment they were sent with were like pickaxes and like chemicals to test rocks to see if they are gold or if it has qualities of gold. So they were sent with a lot of mining type stuff and things to search for gold. There's no gold in Virginia, so obviously that did not work. So these 100 men are heading to America. They think this is going to be quite easy. They'll be home in 6 months with boatloads of gold, and everybody will be rich. So the first permanent English settlement in America was not the Pilgrims and religious freedom. The first permanent English settlement in America were these Englishmen looking for gold, over here to make money, and then they're going to live the rest of their life back in England as rich men. They were so certain that they were on the right track that they could do this, they're going to start looking for gold before they start building houses. They're going to start looking for gold before they start planting crops. They go through their supplies very quickly, and things are bad pretty quick. Now, where we're talking about here, this is Maryland, this is Virginia, and Jamestown was about here-ish in Virginia. They were up into the Chesapeake Bay and up the James River because they did not want to be too close to the coast because they were afraid that the Spanish would see them and maybe the year this happens, of course, is 1607. Was that on the first slide? Nope. So Jamestown, the first permanent settlement, that was 1607. And the most famous of all the settlers was John Smith. Captain John Smith. But he was not in charge initially. In fact, he was a little bit of a troublemaker on the boat ride over, and the governor that was supposed to be in charge of the colony that had him arrested and put in chains. So he actually showed up to Jamestown as a prisoner, and he just gave the governor a hard time. He was like, "No, this is stupid. I think we ought to do this." Because he was a soldier, and he had, been sent on expeditions before. And he said, when they were, kind of planning, well, when we land, we're going to do this. By week 2, we're going to do this. He was like, well, number one, you need to start building shelter. We need to find a source of fresh water. We need to make sure our food is rationed to where it will last at least this many months. And the other guys in charge were like, no, we're just going to find the gold and get back on the ship and go home. And John Smith, he had a very colorful vocabulary, and he probably called him some names, and they had him arrested. So John Smith, eventually, he does become known as the savior of Jamestown because he was right. Food is running out. They are literally freezing to death the first winter. And John Smith actually will go out and try to negotiate with the Indians that are there. And the Indians that are around that settlement, they were known as the Powhatan Indians. And he made some treaties with the Powhatan Indians to where he would give them metal tools, and they would give the Englishmen food to help survive that first winter. And this became kind of a thing. The English would have to keep going back to the Powhatans for help. And the Powhatans sometimes would help them, other times they would refuse. But before we get much further here, I want us to look at something real quick. And Sydney, you already did this because we didn't get to it on Friday, but you did it for me already, and I appreciate that. But we're all going to look at it now. All right. We got a couple of primary source documents written by this guy, John Smith. John Smith, this was his rule at Jamestown. Once he does make this alliance with the Indians, and in both of these accounts, at the very end, it does talk about how the Indians will give them food, the English food, and the English will bring them back, metal tools and things like that. So once John Smith secures that alliance, John Smith becomes the leader of Jamestown because he's bringing them food, so he gets to be in charge. And his rule, he that will not work shall not eat. He had a key to the storehouse. He handed out rations. He told the guys, we got to build homes, we got to build defenses. Let's do this. Now, things do not go well initially because they did not prepare as soon as they arrived like they should have. There was a starving time. In fact, we're going to watch a little video about the starving time, and there is evidence, archaeological evidence and diary evidence that some of the colonists were eating dead people. only after they had eaten their shoes, because their shoes were made of leather, which is, you know, kind of an animal hide. They ate everything they could think of eating, and then they started digging up dead people to eat. So the starving time. After the starving time, only about 60 survive. A resupply ship will arrive from England to bring them resupplies, and on that ship is this guy, John Rolfe. He is the John that marries Pocahontas, and that kind of puts an alliance between the Indians and the English. So we're going to watch, it's about 10 minutes worth of a video that will talk a little bit about the starving time and John Rolfe, and what this colony finally does do to start making money. Here we go.
Shiploads of businessmen and true believers are crossing the Atlantic Ocean to create a new world. May 1610, 120 years after Columbus, it's still a perilous journey. One ship, the Deliverance, carries a cargo that will change America forever. On board is John Rolfe, a 24-year-old English farmer, ambitious, self-reliant, visionary, a born entrepreneur. What takes us 6 hours today by plane was then a voyage of more than 2 months. 7 of the early adventurers out of every 10 will be dead within a year. But the risks are worth it. North America is the ultimate land of opportunity. A continent of vast, untapped wealth, starting with the most valuable resource of all, land. What will be home to more than 300 million people lies under a blanket of forest covering nearly half the land, more than 50 billion trees. Further west, 9 million square miles of vast American wilderness. 60 million bison roam the plains. And underground, there are rumors of gems, silver, the largest seams of gold in the world. The settlers expect nothing less than El Dorado. Jamestown in the middle of a Native American empire. 60 starving settlers among 20,000 of the Powhatan Nation, armed with bows and arrows that are up to 9 times faster to reload and fire than an English musket. They're soon enemies. Only 1 in 10 of the original settlers is left. John Rolfe didn't come to plunder and leave with the others. He's got his own plan. There's money in tobacco, and England is addicted. He's arrived with a supply of South American tobacco seeds, but growing it is limited to the Spanish colonies. The Spanish control the worldwide trade. Selling tobacco seeds to foreigners is punishable by death. But John Rolfe has got his hands on some. No one knows how. And in the warm, humid climate, fertile soil around the Chesapeake Bay, Rolfe's tobacco crop flourishes. The first large harvest produced by these seeds is worth more than $1 billion in today's money.
The great strength of America is our people. You want to know what is the defining strength of America? It is our people, our immigrant tradition, our bringing in cultures from all over the world.
I know what goes into making success, and when somebody's really successful, it's rarely luck. It's talent, it's brain power, it's lots of other things.
Rolfe marries the daughter of the king of the Powhatan Empire. Her name becomes legend. Pocahontas. In England, Rolfe makes her a celebrity when her face is put on a portrait that sells all over London, advertising life in the New World. Shakespeare mentions the comet. England's rich invest money here. All of London knows about this land of plenty. Within 2 years, tobacco grows in every garden. From a living hell, Jamestown is America's first boom town. 2 years later, nearly 1,000 more settlers arrived, including 19 from West Africa. Slaves. But some go on to own their own land in Virginia.
12 years after the founding of Jamestown, Africans were playing a shaping role in the creation of the colonies. That's pretty incredible.
30 years later, there are over 20,000 settlers in Virginia. America is founded on tobacco. For the next century and a half, it's the continent's largest export. Ten years after Rolfe
Finally making money in Jamestown. It took a while, but they finally are making a profit. And more settlers from England are coming into Jamestown, and Jamestown starts growing. And that obviously is going to cause some conflict with the Native Americans. So, brown gold. They didn't find the real gold, but they have the brown gold, which of course is tobacco. And it became so popular in England that just a small little section of your yard that you grew a small portion of tobacco, it was more than what a lot of, like, a working class person back in England was making. So it was, to a lot of folks, it was worth the risk to give up your sweatshop job in a factory in England, or you're working for somebody else and trying to make it over in America by growing tobacco. Yes, ma'am?
Did the amount of people from England wanting to come over to America increase like the job, like security and stuff in England? Do you know what I mean?
Right, so you're maybe looking at a labor shortage in
Yeah.
England now because so many migrants. No, not yet. We actually do start seeing that about the mid-1700s. So the brown gold, we're going to start seeing a lot more people coming to America. This is going to be the original cash crop for the United States. It is said in the video that it's going to be the #1 cash crop, the #1 money-making crop for the next 100 years. We think a lot about the history of Virginia and the American South in the run-up to the Civil War with the foundation of cotton. You don't start seeing a lot of cotton production until the very end of the 1700s, like 1790 even. Up until then, it's tobacco. Up until then, it is tobacco. And then you will start seeing the switch to cotton. Of course, tobacco is very labor intensive. It still really is today. But if you wanted to make more money, you need to grow more crop. But to grow more crop, you need more health. And that's whenever we start seeing the system of indentured servitude, and then we start seeing the African slave trade being involved. So let's kind of compare the two here. Indentured servants and the African slaves. So indentured servants, these are poor people, usually from England, but you could contract with an indentured servant anywhere throughout Europe. But most were Englanders. They're generally poor people who want to try for that American dream, come to America to try to get a better life, try to make more money, try to just have something better. So they cannot pay for themselves. They cannot afford the boat ride over. They don't have any savings to actually establish a house in the New World. So they agree to a contract where they would work for somebody for a certain amount of time. Usually it was 7 years. Sometimes it went as long as 10 years. During that term of their contract, they had to work for their master and do whatever he or she says. They could not marry. They could not leave the contract. But if they survived, if they finished that 10 years of work or that 7 years of work, then they get 10 acres of land, a new set of clothes, and what would probably be the equivalent of today of about $200. The 10 acres of land is the really big deal here. And, but most people did not survive their contract. This is what an indentured servant contract looked for, or it looked like, I'm sorry. And the contract was each individual got one of these seals, the master and then the indentured servant. And this Headright system, this was an incentive for landowners in Virginia to hire and contract with indentured servants. Because for every indentured servant you hired, you contracted with, you got an extra 50 acres of land. or the company, depending on where you lived. If this was in Jamestown, the Virginia company would give you 50 more acres of land. So, a lot of Virginias will hire out and make indentured servant contracts with these poor people in Europe and England and bring them over to work. Yeah, and this, I already mentioned this. If you survive the contract, you get a new set of clothes, 10 acres of land, and a little bit of pocket money, a little bit of cash. But yeah, this was a binding legal document, and at one point, about a quarter of Jamestown's population were indentured servants. So there were a lot of indentured servants that came over. Now, African slaves, the first Africans were brought to Jamestown in 1619. And the first Africans that came over in 1619, they were treated as indentured servants. They entered into a contract in Virginia, in Jamestown, and eventually it became something else, obviously. The first Africans were indentured servants, but then the African slave trade and Virginians buying the enslaved Africans became that. And slavery in Virginia went through a couple of different phases. Let's see if I find that chart. We'll come back to all of that. Okay, here we go. You can see here the number of slaves, and this is just in Virginia. Not a lot until you get here. And then it's on a steady incline. This is kind of a constant slope, but then something else happens here. And then makes it increase even more.
Can you turn off my hall pass?
Oh, I'm sorry. You see, this is the thing about the hall pass that is a little irritating, because I have to clickety-click too much, and I don't like the clickety-click. Okay, here we go. I think we're good now. So, right here is whenever we see what we now know as slavery become the norm instead of indentured servants. And the difference between an indentured servant and buying an enslaved person is an indentured servant has a 10-year contract, and an enslaved person is property for life. Here, the change here in the law in Virginia is that in this period of time, once an enslaved person dies, that is over. And any children that they had while they were slaves are not assumed to be the slave of that enslaved person's master or enslaver. But here, Virginia law has changed. And now, whenever an enslaved woman gives birth, then the baby becomes the property of her enslaver. So now you start having hereditary slavery here, which becomes more lucrative for the enslavers. So 2 changes in the law accounts for these 2 upticks in the rate of slavery in Virginia. All right, we're going to go, we're going to go back a bit, and then where we were earlier. Okay, so the first slaves arrived in Virginia, the first Africans arrived in Virginia in 1619. There were 20 Africans. By 1670, there are thousands of enslaved Africans in Virginia, but there were also thousands of free Africans in Virginia as well, because the initial Africans were indentured servants. And of course, the slave trade. We're talking the west coast of Africa. Most Africans are either going to Brazil or to the West Indies. But you can see these percentages. This is where Africans are initially taken. Now, most Africans that were taken into British North America usually originated, well, obviously Africa, but then the West Indies, and then up into British North America. All right, last little bit with Jamestown is this. 1622. 1622 was the Great Indian Massacre, and this is a picture that we saw earlier, first day of class. And this goes back to the expansion of Jamestown, but it also, we can trace this back to Pocahontas as well. Pocahontas is now dead. So this alliance between the English and the Indians, the Powhatan Indians, is dead. And this Indian massacre is led by her brother, who is one of your vocab words. Opie-Can-Canoe is his name. Opie-Can-Canoe is the uncle of Pocahontas. He is now the new Chief Powhatan. And he is letting the Englishmen know that the peace is over and y'all need to quit spreading out. Stick to your little Jamestown area. All right, we're gonna get to that next time. How are we doing on time here? We got 19 minutes. Okay, so we're gonna come back to that. Let's jump to this real quick. But before we do that, we're gonna watch what the video has to say about the Pilgrims. There we go.
Arrives in Jamestown. Another group of English settlers lands in North America. They come ashore on a deserted beach 450 miles up the coast from Jamestown. Call the place Plymouth, after the English port they Jamestown, there were others here first. April 1621. The Pilgrims have been in the New World for 5 months. Barely half survived the first winter. But they're not the first Europeans to arrive on this coast. 5 years before, European ships brought light-skinned people and plague. Almost 9 out of 10 of the local people are wiped out. The Pokanoket people don't need enemies. They make peace with the Pilgrims. They teach the English how to grow crops in sandy soil using fish for fertilizer. But they want something in return. They have a common enemy, a rival tribe, and the English have powerful weapons. The Pilgrims aren't soldiers, but in the New World, they have to fight to survive. On August 14th, 1621, the Pilgrims and Pokanoket, shoulder to shoulder, will launch a surprise attack that will seal their future in this new land.
It was resolved to send 14 men, well armed, and to fall upon them in the night. The captain gave charge, let none pass out.
The rival tribe doesn't know what hit them. Surrounded, they have no answer for English firepower. Pokanoket and Pilgrims find common ground and a chance to survive. Two unlikely allies, a partnership all too rare in North America. children. And they are twice as likely to survive to adulthood.
All right.
They are 20% richer.
Okay, shush. All right. So, New England, or as it's listed in our assignment sheet, the NBC. NBC stands for Massachusetts Bay Colony. That is where the Pilgrims landed. So, you have Jamestown in 1607, and it's just some guys over here short term, trying to find gold, trying to make money. But then 1620, you get the Pilgrims. It's whole families. And they're coming over here to live forever. Because their religion has pretty much been outlawed in England. They had left England and they had lived in the Netherlands for a little while. But then they found out they could move to America and just really be on their own. And live in their own little Puritan community and worship God and have babies, and it'll be great. So they come over here. So you have a group of 102 settlers on the Mayflower. Most of them are Puritans, and Puritan is the proper name for them. We called them Pilgrims, but that's kind of the elementary version. Okay, the Puritans, that's the religious group. They want to purify their faith for the Lord. They thought the Church of England had made it impure. So the Puritans were trying to purify their Christian faith and to please the Lord. The rest of the 102, they were paying members. They paid a price to join this new colony in America. They agreed to live by the Puritan rules because they thought that this would be better. They made a deal with the Virginia Company, and they actually were supposed to be close to Jamestown. They were supposed to be down in Virginia, Maryland, that part of America, but the ship went off course and they landed up in Massachusetts, a couple hundred miles off course. They ended up in what they called Plymouth Bay, and that becomes Massachusetts. It was not Virginia. So, the original settlement for religious freedom and to start a new life that way, that is the Puritans. Jamestown was first, Puritans, 13 years later. We'll come back to that. We have about 6 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we have enough time to do our learning check and to talk about what you need to do for me this evening. So let's go